Good morning. We're here in the weekly webinar. This week, we're talking about intelligence agents, particularly in Brightspace. And we'll also talk about managing large groups in other platforms such as the MS Teams or anything like that that you're using to contact students and things like that. So today it is more of an open discussion, but I want to make sure that everyone's aware of what resources are available to you. And then after that, I'm going to also show you some of the very basics of the space here in Brightspace for intelligent agents. So for those of you who are unaware what an intelligent agent is in Brightspace, I'm just going to first share some links. I know I put it into the calendar invite, but for some people who may have gotten the invite separately, I'm going to at least share these out. The first one basically talks about getting started inside of the intelligent agents. And the second one is more personalizing your communication. So it basically explains what exactly is intelligent agents if you're kind of looking for more of that information. So I'm going to share these links like I mentioned, and then we'll kind of get more started into a little bit of a demo here. So you can see these pages. There we go. All right, so to get us started though, instead of the intelligent agents, the first thing is intelligent agents are basically ways that you can communicate with students without actually always sending the email yourself. You could basically set it up so that it is triggered by certain actions that the student does or does not do inside of your course. So there can be some benefits, especially if you have a large group of students or if you have many classes that you're teaching. Or if you just like to be super organized and you would rather set up some of these because you know you would already send these to students if you were aware of certain things, like if they haven't logged in for the first week, that type of thing. So we're going to talk about today. We'll also include why you might want to use it, and we'll talk about best practices when you do use it, because there are some surprises inside of the intelligent agents. I You kind of realize that it's not just intuitively intelligent, it's meant so that you can do things, but there's also things that are set there that can also be huge failures if you're unaware of these things. So I just want to go over some things when I set up an intelligent agent, and I'll explain how I've used them in the past when I was teaching. Um, and then we'll talk about whoever's using them now, how it works for you, and things like that. So on these pages that I mentioned, you can see some of the best practices, but I'm going to first actually share my screen inside of Brightspace so we know where we're talking about, and what kind of some of the basic things are that you should be aware of. So I have a sandbox, a play course shell, basically. It's something that I can invite colleagues to double check things and then test out some of my emails and those intelligent agents, essentially. If you are setting it up inside of a course, I highly recommend that you make sure you have a sandbox or kind of a practice area that is separate from your courses with your students. That way you can actually test out what you ideally wanted to make sure that it really is the way that you want it to be. So today when we're talking about the communication, we're actually talking about the intelligent agents here. And this course that I have in the sandbox has none of them set up yet. Otherwise, they would be listed here based on the names of the intelligent agents that I've created. So it is important when you're creating a list that you're fully aware by the name what the item is that you're doing. So for example, if I'm going to set up an agent for students who have not logged in ever into my course, then I would make sure that the title might say something like students who've never logged in. But before I get excited about creating a new agent, I first want to check my settings. So I'll go to settings over here. And this is one part that it's really important and essential. By default, the intelligent agents in Brightspace actually send an email from the D2L support, and all the replies that students would possibly have to that email go immediately back to D2L support. You can change that, obviously, but an important part to note is that you can never change your from email. You can only set it so that if the students reply, it would go to you. So that's one important part that you want to do. The other part is that it never really says who it's from, so it's pretty generic. So you would want to identify yourself here by at least placing your name. And then you can place the your email. So that's one important change that you would want to make immediately. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here, just so you can see what it looks like. There we go. And then you hit save. Now, when I go to the new agent, this is where I would start the process of whatever I would like it to be. You do want to add a description if this is your first time doing it, especially, and you would want to name whatever it is. So I'm going to put it like students who have never logged into the course. Okay. If it's the student role, then I would want to make sure that I'm selecting the role as the student. And then in this case, I'm looking for people who have not logged into my course, right? But this is actually, the first one is like who's logged into Brightspace, which is not what I care about. I care about if they've accessed my class. So it's really, when we're talking, you usually automatically think about whether they've logged into your course. It's accessing your course in Brightspace. I like to do it after the first 7 days, and it could be maybe even after the first 10 days, so you give them a little bit of leeway. But they should actually, hopefully, have accessed your course at least once. So this is what this is gonna, this one is just an example of it, okay? So we have 7 days, let's say, and then there's release conditions. And in this case, I'm not going to do that because I'm only caring about whether or not they've accessed the course. And this one was the login. The access of this release conditions is based on whether or not they have submitted assignments, they've done things in group work. And for today's example, I'm only going to be focusing on the people who have never logged into my course, essentially. But if you have something like they haven't participated in a group discussion or a particular item that you're really concerned about, then that's what you would be creating here, is under those release conditions. Now, the next thing is you can do it for the first time that it happens or every time that it happens, which means that it is triggered repeatedly every day. I don't recommend the every time because that's like spamming your student for every time that they haven't logged in. It can be the same for any release conditions. You really don't need to send an email every day for someone. So it should just be a first time thing. And then the next part is what do you want it to do? It's basically you're always going to be sending an email essentially in here. Now you'll notice that this now says the name from me and my email address. If I hadn't changed that setting, I'm going to show you on a different screen because I left this page blank and didn't change the setting. This is what it would show. So you can always check yourself as you're setting up your agent to make sure if it's going to come from something that's identifying you, and more specifically, if that reply is set correctly to be you instead of D2L support. Now, can you imagine if a student sends an email, to reply to someone saying that they haven't logged in, and if they are replying and it goes directly to D2L support, depending on the email chain of what is set as the subject, it can be hard to figure out what that email is about and what course it's related to, why the student's emailing the support. And so that's why it's important to set your reply to, and it's important to identify what's going on in that subject. So you'll notice a little bit here, I already have it listed as the BCC. So I'm going to go back to our main one that we were working in here, which is the one that has my reply to email. Now, there is the to and the subject that is required. And you'll notice I can have a to, a CC, and a BCC. And this is where privacy really matters, because here I can actually make sure that it's any user that actually has that issue. So in this case, our issue for today was the students who have never logged into the course. So if they don't log into the course, then I can either send it as the to, the CC, or BCC. That means that every day, whoever is listed in that category would get that email. So if I listed it in the to, then they would all see each other and they would all know who has not logged into the course, which is not what you want. You want it to be a BCC. So you want the students not to see who is failing, who is not turning something in, who is not doing or participating in the course. You don't want them to see that. It should always be the BCC. This is super important. For the to, I usually just send it to myself because this also does not default always to send to you. At least that was one of the old settings from back when I was teaching in the Brightspace. So as your to, you can always send to yourself, and then you'll see that there is at least someone that is not logging into your course. In this case, keep in mind it's what the student sees as the subject. So I would not be putting something like what I have up here, like students who haven't logged into the course. This subject would be trying to trigger the student to actually come to the course. And it would need to identify which course they might actually need to log into. So also keep in mind that you're trying to keep it fun and you're trying to get them interested. And then also your message. Keep in mind that although it's personal and you personalize it if you want based on HTML, if it's triggered every week, depending on how you've set it up, they'll get the exact same email every time that this item is done. So in this case, this is setting up for every time that they haven't logged in for 7 days. So keep in mind while you're creating that email message, you can alter it however you would like. What is nice too here is that you can attach a file. So this could be something that you do at the very beginning of a course for additional aid for particular assignments for those who haven't turned something in, or it can be triggered for when they have turned something in, especially if you're doing some sort of game-based learning or something where you can say, you know, step 1 was completed, here's the instruction for step 2. So that can be to help trigger them to go along. You can do things according to scheduling, so you can actually schedule how this works. And then, of course, you have save and close and save. So before I go any further, I just want to see if anyone has any questions about this part. Does anyone have any questions about intelligent agents here in Brightspace?
The one time I used it, I checked indeed whether people were logging into a course, and the only complaint I got is that they got too many messages. And also what I checked is whether they were not active for 2 weeks or so. And that, yeah, apparently you ask too much. I think it is normal that you log in every week or so if you're participating in a course. But some students feel that they have the freedom to not be involved or so. I don't know. It's a sensitive issue.
Yeah, because, and keep in mind, it's partly because it can do it every time the learner hasn't done something, or it can be just a one-time shot. So if you have the repetition of only happening the once, if they haven't logged into the course one time, you've at least triggered them and you've identified it. You know who it is, possibly that you're tracking on the side. The other important part about this is at the very top, there's an agent is enabled. So after the first week, you could just do it once and then turn it off so it never happens again, because clearly by the second or third week, you know who is really not going to be a part of your course. And that was maybe for the first round of people who were just forgot to log in the first few days or something like that. So you kind of know your audience as to what's normal and how often maybe they like to be contacted. The second part that you say too is a few weeks later if they haven't done much inside the course. And that's kind of identifying what they have done and what they haven't done. And the catch here is usually how we write those messages to them and how we intrigue them to come to the course. So typically those messages are, I would say, too automated, in the sense that it's not necessarily like you have these 4 items you haven't done. We noticed you haven't done these 4 items. Um, if you hear something like that, you're less likely to probably go and check to see those 4 items. But if you say, "Hi, we've noticed that you haven't participated in the discussions. We miss you," and then you add, "Did you forget these items?" or something like that. It's just a different way of communicating too when you're writing those messages. So first, have a look at what you're saying, because usually we write what we need them to do, and it should be also like how to personalize it as if you were talking to the person in front of you. So I think that kind of changes how we rewrite. George, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, if you have, for example, more than one instructor for your course, can you do multiple email addresses?
So the reply to can only be one person, but you can actually, in that naming convention, when I had the name that emails come from, in theory, I'm going to go to the other section here. I'm going to show you, because you can actually make that, it's just typable. It's just the email itself cannot be. So in this setting, I can say that it's like George, Calvin, Sarah, and let's say myself, right? If we add everyone there, then you know that, except that only one of us will get the reply. Now, that being said, inside of the email itself, you can CC or put the 2 and hope that they reply to all, and that can help. Keep in mind that the other students hopefully are in the BCC and would not, of course, get the reply all. You can also make this message at the end, have the names of the people, and include the emails that you would want them to actually respond to, just in case they don't have those emails on hand easily and don't know where this is. But again, if you have it in the 2 or the CC, that also helps.
George, just as a recommendation on that, you can also request that a functional email box be created. And I often do that at courses with multiple instructors, because then you can check the same email box and you can separate it from your own personal email. You just have to remember to check or put in Outlook, but then you can have an email box that all of the teachers can see, and you can actually archive the emails related to the course. It's a nice way to keep everything in one place.
So can you then have a sort of a no reply in the return email, so they cannot email this back from this message, but they have to look in one of the, well, in the email itself, who they should contact?
The only option for an absolute no reply is when you have basically left it here. It's not necessarily a no reply, it just sends to the D2L. I mean, in theory, you could have a no reply, but this would be for all agents. It doesn't separate it out for each agent. It's for all of them inside of that course. So if you happen to know a no reply email, you could in theory do that. But technically speaking, I would suggest still keeping it as a reply to at least one instructor, or like Calvin mentions, like a box for all the instructors, I think is a good way of doing it too.
Yes, thank you.
I think, Eddie, do you have a comment or question?
Yes, please. Would triggering, like clicking a link in Brightspace, would it also be able to use that as a trigger for or not clicking a link after a certain time, actually?
So it's based on that, in that case, because we'll go back up here, you have the options of the login activity, the course activity, or the release conditions. So the release conditions is basically where you can look at assignments that they've turned in, checklists that they've done. You can look at the content that they've viewed, and then you can look at the discussions, grades, quizzes, and surveys. You'll notice that it doesn't say anything about like the links that they've clicked, but in generally it would be like the visited content topic. Then you would select whatever the item is, which would likely be a page that contains a link. You can't see if they've clicked on a link on that page. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments here?
Yeah, just one question. You mentioned you could get an overview of the students that the email is sent to, or is email just sent and you don't know who it's sent to exactly?
So the catch in that sense is on the email, there's the BCC, right? So in theory, when you would get this email, if I remember it right, you don't get to see who's in the BCC. However, in the message, you can have HTML and it can possibly identify the person inside the course. But what I typically do is in the past when I used this, I emailed myself and left this as a BCC. And then I could see myself like who hadn't logged into the course, and then because it should say that there's like 4 who haven't logged in, and so it's still an easy target as to seeing who it got sent to. I haven't used the intelligent agents myself here since I've moved, so it's been a little bit, so there might be other features here that I'm unaware of as far as showing the names. Of course, if you do the CC, you see it and so do the other students, which is not what you really want. I didn't know that initially when I first ran this, because I don't remember why I set this up, because I think I was setting it up. Oh, when I set up, because this is when I first did the intelligent agents, it was in 2011. And the feature actually hid the BCC. It was an additional line. And so you had to click it. My first run of this, I did this as a 2 because it made sense. And yeah, that was a huge fail because I tested it. It worked because it was in my test thing. And then I saw that it actually didn't trigger by student. It triggered for all, which was horrifying to see the first week. So I immediately disabled it and adjusted it and then looked for where the BCC was, but it was not set up initially as nicely. But things changed. I mean, that was 2011. Anyone else? Is anyone currently using intelligent agents here in Brightspace?
Yeah, I've played around with them a bit, mainly just to sort of poke users, because what I've found is, especially with first-year students, they don't realize that even without intelligent agents, sometimes I did dumb agents, just me looking at things and pointing out. And students are surprised that we can monitor such things. But also just giving them that little poke has been extremely useful, just reminding them. So especially with like blended learning content, emailing them if they haven't accessed the blended learning content before the lecture, just to sort of send a nice little email like, see, you haven't prepared for this lecture. I hope, reassuring that, transitioning to university is stressful and time management is a big thing, but please try and make sure you're prepared next time so that it doesn't hold the rest of the class back. And those sorts of messages and stuff, it's a nice wake-up call because they think they can be anonymous and not seen.
Yeah, my experience with the login one is sometimes students were like, I didn't even know I was still registered. Oh, thanks. And then they would make their adjustments, enrollments, or they would actually start participating in the course. Because in the US, you can pre-register months in advance and then, of course, forget what you've actually signed up for. So that's a little bit different over here because you enroll differently. But still, the login thing is important. And like you say, the content, if you're preparing for a course coming up and you should have done something before the course, it's a good reminder. There's a flip side too, because we've been talking more about like if you haven't done something.
Yeah.
The opposite is true, where if you have completed your work, if you have gotten a passing grade, or if you've completed all components in the course, you can, of course, send something that says something positive. But like I mentioned a little bit, you can also do something that's more game-based too, of like, you're ahead of blah 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 in the course, or you're ahead of the overall scheme of the plan. Time wise, you're well ahead of finishing the course on time or whatever it is. But you can do the opposite side, which we tend to look at intelligent agents as the opposite. Anyone else currently using or have played around with the intelligent agents here in Brightspace?
Yes, we have for our course. Actually, we're using it right now. And one of the downsides that I noticed is because we're mainly using it, did you hand in your assignments in time? And just regular updates, hey, the new week is available with a direct link to the course. The downside of the intelligent agents that I see, because I like to automate as much as possible, but it sends them at 10 in the evening, while our course releases at 9 in the morning. So that's a bit of a time difference that you have, and it becomes less flexible. So I think we've addressed it before, right? So what kind of emails do you send? I really like those small nudges, especially in a blended context when you're working towards, as Calvin said, towards a group session. It's really nice to remind them, but it's also a bit rigid at the same time. That it's set on one.
It is. It can be very rigid. And like you say, there's the scheduling, so you can set it up so it would be weekly, monthly, daily, or annually. And that repeats every so often as that agent is active. So it could be like a weekly thing that you set up, or it's a bi-weekly. And here are the scheduled dates that it only runs between this and this date. But like you say, there's nothing here that controls the actual time. So that can be frustrating. But if you've let students know in advance at the beginning of your course in a syllabus that I'm using automated emails to help your progress in the course, they'll be released every time at 10 p.m. So just so you're aware that happens. You can put it in somewhere, or you can say that to your students somewhere in the beginning. I actually, when get the first email ever inside the course that's automated, I went back and I emailed the student to let them know. So I said, hi, I noticed that you hadn't logged in yet. I'm sure you got this email. So I just wanted to check in with you and see if you needed anything else. And I did that for their initial time that I knew that they were getting something. So it depends on your audience if you feel like they need that or not, or if that extra email is just beyond extra.